Welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I am your host, Joseph Bruen, and we have a very special guest this week as we continue on with Sci-Fi Week. Certainly no stranger to Star Wars and so many projects you've been a part of. The great Howie Weed. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad you guys have me on. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you a part of this and, take a little deep dive into your career. You've been a part of so many great films and projects over the years. Kind of rewinding back to the very beginning, growing up as a child, what were some of your favorite films?
That was back when there was no VCRs, no VHS players, no nothing. So it was whatever was on TV is all you had to pick from. So we had a VHF channel, Channel 44, which would show programming that was not just for adults. It was like had kids mixed in mind. So they would show a lot of Ray Harryhausen stuff. So I got introduced to Jason and the Argonauts and a lot of the Sinbad movies and Mysterious Island, the original Ray Harryhausen one, and First Men on the Moon or In the Moon. I just loved all those. And one of the reasons I loved them is because they had these great creature moments in it. And later on, I actually got a chance to talk to Ray Harryhausen, and he just talked about how he'd build these movies around these big effects moments that he had in mind. And that was like, for me as a kid, just the best. And then as I got into the 70s, science fiction kind of lost its way. Interestingly enough, in the 70s, you were really like struggling as a science fiction fan. You were really struggling to find something to hang on to. You had 2001, The Space Odyssey and Planet of the Apes, which was all great. But until Star Wars came along, it was kind of Zardoz-y and rollerball-y and Soylent Greeny and oh gosh, what was the name? Silent Running. And those are the movies that you had to hold on to. So all of those films for me were great. And then Star Wars came along and kind of changed everything.
And you pretty much summed it up right there. But my next question was going to be, how important was Star Wars to the genre of sci-fi and what did it mean moving forward?
It's sort of like there was everything before Star Wars and then everything after Star Wars. And for people who grew up with Star Wars and it existed already, and you watched the original films on VHS or DVD, maybe you caught them in a theater if you're lucky, and then you've seen the prequels and the sequels. I can't emphasize, you can't understate it, what Star Wars was like when it came out. It was truly, like without exaggeration, a phenomenon. It was everywhere in the press, but nowhere to be seen except in a movie theater. You couldn't go look at a magazine, for instance, that had anything to do with Star Wars in it. There was nothing. There was a Time magazine eventually that had some images in the middle. There were lobby cards. If you went to science fiction conventions, you could own some lobby cards. If you were smart enough to buy the Coming to Your Galaxy This Summer poster, which I was not, you had that. There was a trailer on 16 millimeter. And then that's it. If you saw Star Wars and then you wanted to like experience it a little bit more, there was no outlet other than getting back in line, which was 3 wide going around the block and see it again. And the experience of seeing Star Wars was unlike seeing any Star Wars movie now. I mean, you'll have right now, if a new Star Wars movie comes out and you get the big Star Wars logo kind of like flashing and then going off into the distance, everyone fist pumps and expresses, their utter joy and screams, and then they watch the movie. But that wasn't the case with the original Star Wars. People were screaming and laughing and just over the moon with their excitement all the way through it. I actually took a recorder, a cassette recorder, to the movies and recorded it, the whole movie, and you could just hear it. Like the energy was like through the roof the entire show, and that was really neat. And I could kind of listen to that, and you could vaguely hear the movie like R2, but then you just hear this like kind of excitement all the way through. It was so great.
And that's a great thing to capture. I mean, there's nothing like hearing those reactions, first go around. Such a a unique new experience, like you said, for the fans. So something very special, and that's exactly what Star Wars had become. And you have been such a big part of, visual and special effects and so many different things behind the scenes. How did you first get your foot in the door and decide, this is something I'd like to do?
I sort of knew I wanted to be in the film industry in some way, shape, or form, since I was like in like middle school. So I remember walking down the street from middle school to my house, and I kind of just in my head I was like, somehow, I'm not exactly sure how, I'm going to end up in the movie business somewhere. And I didn't know how. I mean, of course, everybody's like, I'll be a director or something. I'll be a writer. But I didn't know. I knew there were all these different roles. But back then, there was no way of like figuring out how to get in. There was no internet. There were no, like, unless you knew somebody who worked at a studio, or had a professional job in the film industry, you're just sort of like out in the middle of nowhere, like not knowing what to do next. You could go to film school and find like-minded people, and hopefully some of them got a break, and then maybe that's how you got in. But for me, I lucked out in that I was living in San Francisco, and I went downtown one day, and on a telephone pole there was like a want to help us make a movie, kind of like a little mini poster on a telephone pole was stapled to it, and little phone numbers you could rip off on the bottom, like, hey, you need a babysitter? This was like, hey, you want to work on movies? So I ripped it off. I called them up, and it was this little company called Footloose Films, and they were making a vampire movie called Dracula's Disciple, and they had been making it for years, and they just made it on the weekends. They were shooting it in 16 millimeter, but you could go to their meetings, and they would literally pass around a hat to buy enough film stock to shoot the next film. And in exchange, they gave lessons. They had like a schedule. You could come back to this meeting place, and the guy who did lighting would show you how to like put up a light and like focus it and give you the principles of lighting. And then the next time they went on a shoot, if you wanted to, you could help crew the lighting crew. Same with camera, same with everything else. So for me, where they were really having difficulties was finding anybody who had any special effects skills, because they needed like a decapitated head. Ooh, cool. They needed like buckets of blood for vampire effects. They needed, I remember they had a big ripping the human face off of a skull kind of effect. So I had a garage and I had tools, and I met a really good buddy in that Footloose Films. His name was Brent Baker, and he was a real creature nut. So he kind of knew all this stuff. And I said, how about me and you? I got the tools. I got a place to like experiment. You know what the heck you're doing. So let's go figure some of this stuff out, and we'll tell them that we can do the special effects. And that's what we ended up doing. We just worked on it. There's some stuff on YouTube, and you can see us trying to figure stuff out. I mean, I look like I'm like 10 years old, and we're just so thrilled that anything worked. And, it was like, we're trying to make foam, which is, to make human skin. And it's like, geez, this is like chemistry. How are we supposed to do this? And there really wasn't even, there's no YouTube. There's no way to find out anything. You just had books from the library that were like really old, even though we were very young. They were like kind of black and white books on how to do like makeup effects. So, and nobody else around us who knew what the heck they were doing. So it was trial and error, and we did manage to get a few good effects into Dracula's Disciple. Unfortunately, the movie never came out. There was a fire and then a flood of water, and it kind of destroyed the movie. Unfortunately, yeah, I think it was all being edited in a print shop above a big printing press. Then there was a fire, and then that was kind of the end of that. There was never be able to be salvaged. Very sad.
Oh my goodness!
But I still have my Dracula's Disciple T-shirt. So,
hey, there you go. That might be worth something.
Maybe someday.
And were you a part of Gremlins behind the scenes as well? Was that one of your first, real roles?
Yeah. The Footloose Films, Dracula's Disciple was not a paying gig. We were sort of the other way around. We were paying them and learning, and like a school almost. And then the guy that I mentioned who knew a lot about effects, he got hired by Chris Wallace, who was making this little unknown movie called Gremlins. And Chris had been working at Industrial Light and Magic, and was working in the creature shop, coming up with creatures. I believe it was for Jedi, and like doing maquettes and things like that. And he left ILM to create his own shop. So he was kind of needing crew. And he found a lot of people who were very enthusiastic, but had basically zero experience doing this kind of stuff. And I was one of them. I came in about halfway through the project, and right when they started to make massive amounts of gremlins, and I learned mold making and foam casting, and just sort of the principles of professional visual effects. And I remember we used to have these. We'd make these gremlin bodies and gremlin heads and gremlin arms, and just throw them into a shopping cart that someone had taken from the mall, and we would like dump all these body parts into the shopping cart and then walk them down the street to this other area where people would assemble the puppets. And it always looked to me like kind of funny because you could see arms and legs and stuff sticking out of the shopping cart. We're just like just walking down the street with this stuff. But that was my first professional experience. I got to go down on set. The moment in the movie I got hired mostly for was the big theater scene when you see, I don't know, 100 gremlins all singing Hi Ho to
Yes.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Yeah, so they just needed a mass amount of gremlins built. And so I was working in a storage container, like, you know, those big steel ones you see on ships. They had one of those with tables in it and fans and, you know, electrical cords going in there. It was freezing in the winter, and I couldn't have been happier. I was like the happiest guy you'd ever meet because I was working on a movie. You know, it was my dream. My dream was kind of coming true. And I left college to go do that. And I sort of figured, you know, I'll do this for a while, and then when this shop project's over, I'll just go back to school. And then it just sort of kept snowballing and never ended. So,
right. And as I said, you were a part of, you know, you never had a second to stop. You were a part of so many different projects. You went on to become chief creature maker for The Empire Strikes Back, the second installment, you know, to the world of Star Wars. What was it like being a part of that project, and what did that role mean for you behind the scenes? What were your involvement there?
I want to clarify that I am not the original Wampa maker. I'm not
Yes.
you know, those guys back then. I was part of the special edition. And so, yeah, I was already at ILM. I was already part of the creature department. I had worked on Ghostbusters 2, where I played Vigo the Carpathian. Dan Aykroyd transforms out of the painting, and then that's me in the makeup doing all the yelling and screaming. My head flies off and explodes like a Death Star at one point. So when the special edition work came up, we were actually the prequels were in production up at Skywalker Ranch, and we were getting a little drips and drabs of artwork from them. And then all of a sudden, I think there was an idea like, hey, to kind of in the interim before these prequels come out, we could do special editions and release episodes, you know, 4, 5, 6, if you want to go by the nomenclature they use today. For me, it's always Star Wars Empire Jedi. But we could release those with the fixes that George wants to do. So we started getting artwork for Star Wars for the Cantina sequence, and I got involved making a new creature for that scene. And to me, which was like mind blowing, because I get to add a creature to the Cantina scene from the original Star Wars. That's nuts.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a fantastic time doing that. It was called the Ket Wall. And we shot it at ILM in San Rafael. It was like a puppet that you put over your head, and it's very briefly seen. It replaces the werewolf with the glowing red eyes that's drinking something in one shot, which I was very sad about, because messing with Star Wars is like messing with Abbey Road from the Beatles or something. You just don't do it,
Right.
you know. But oh well, if they want me to do it, I'm not going to say no. So that was really fun.
And that creature had mechanical stilts, right?
You know what? That's what the toy shows. When I got the artwork, it was just a big kind of like overcoat, and it had like kind of a rumpus, so it looked like it had a big elephant kind of back end that was covered by a big cloak. And I was really surprised when it came out, and it's like, what? This thing's now got robot legs? It's like, oh, whatever. But yeah, and that sculpture that I did eventually turned into masks that were worn in Phantom Menace, and you can see them, people like walking the streets. With it's that kind of like trunk with the two little horns that come up. It's kind of an elephant looking thing.
Yeah.
So the Wampa came up after we finished the Ket Wall. That was next up. It was Empire and some special edition. And so it came about not so much through artwork. It came about as a conversation where the people in the shop started saying, hey, George is wanting to do some Wampa insert shots to kind of add to the sequence, because he never really got all the shots he wanted to get. And he had to cut around what he had. So he used a lot of sound effects, but you never really see it. And I was like, you mean, are you saying that we might get to build a suit and like do a suit for Empire? And they're like, well, we don't know yet. George is going to come down to ILM and we're all going to sit around a table and talk about it. And I said, well, can you include me in that meeting? And they said, well, yeah, whatever it is we're going to do, if it's happening in the model shop, then you'll be part of that. And I was like, excellent. So right away, I thought, Des Webb, the guy that originally performed the Wampa for the original Empire, had a lot of problems walking in the snow because he was on stilts. So if you can imagine trying to walk through 2 feet of snow wearing stilts, you just get like one step, try to move your other foot and just collapse. And there's actually some documentary, so like behind the scenes witness cam footage of him testing that out in the real snow. And he just kind of falls and comes to his knees. I mean, poor guy, they're putting back up. He's like, okay, this time for sure. Like, I'm really going to, use all my strength, and boom, there's just no way. So they never were able to get those kind of shots. So my idea was like, well, we don't, we're not in Norway anymore. We're here in San Rafael. We're going to be on a stage of some kind. Why don't we just miniaturize the cave and not put the guy in the suit on stilts? So he'll look massive, and we'll just, pick camera angles and lenses, and we'll scale the cave down. And so that was going to be my pitch whenever it is we had this meeting with George. And to sell it, I made a little model of the Wampa, which was like I took one of those wooden art kind of sketch models that you can pose. And on half of it, I sculpted the Wampa's anatomy. And we're just talking like a few hours with like water-based pottery clay. And I made a nice clean slit, like it had been cut in half. So on one side, you're seeing like the wooden model. On the other side, you're seeing the proportions of the creature. And that would show how a human would fit inside the suit. And I had on a little wooden board. And when they said, okay, we're going over to the meeting, I brought that with me. And a bunch of us from ILM went into that room. There was no George yet. It was very jocular. Everybody was excited to see George. And then he came in and he sat down, and we just started in broad terms about all the different shoots they were going to do for Empire, different effects that they wanted to do. And then eventually they got around to talking about, all right, so we want to add some shots to the Wampa Cave. We want to see the creature more. We want to see it eating. We need to see it coming towards Luke, and we need to see the arm get cut off, like an aftermath of that. And he just said, when I cut the film, I wanted there to be a moment where the audience was really startled, like they hadn't seen it yet, really. And then we'd cut to it, and the audience could go, "Oh no! Look at that thing! Luke's in trouble." And he tried to convey that with sound, and the mystery of it. But he just wanted people to be like, "Holy moly! Look at this thing." So I suggested. I said, "Hey, well, I had this idea," and everyone turned to like looking at me, and I said that we could do it as a guy in a suit, and we could scale the cave down so it looks bigger and pick some good angles and some good lenses. And that way we wouldn't have a problem of guy on stilts. And George kind of nodded. And that was right at the time that CG was becoming a really big deal. And we had just done Jumanji. And if you saw the lion that walks by, it has all the fur and everything, which was
Sure.
at the time a very big accomplishment to render fur. So I remember one of the supervisors said, well, if you want to see something, George, you've never seen before, you got to do it in CG. And if you want it to be startling. And then another artist said, well, you want to see something startling, you should see the bids that you're going to get to do that in CG. Ha, ha, ha. And so right then he said, you know what? Let's not make more of this than it needs to be. It's just insert shots. We're just going to do a guy in a suit. And I was like, yes, that's great. And it was settled. And right from that point, we had the green light to, put a crew together and start. I was the crew lead, and we got going on the suit.
And once you did that, what was that suit like? What was it actually made out of? Was it hot? What was the temperature like being in that?
I like to say it was furry hot. It was really hot. They when we shot it, it was on a stage, where they were trying to trick you into thinking the set was bigger than it should have been, than it was. So that meant everything needed to be in focus. Like one of the surefire ways of showing something small is the background goes out of focus because you're focused on something very small in the foreground. So in order to accomplish that, you have to pump in a lot of light. And this is like in the days before LED lights. So every light that you used on a movie set was radiating heat. We shot in the middle of summer, so it was already about 100 degrees outside. We brought in all these lights, and we had these panel lights that had 6 lights in a row on a giant panel. And they called them the wall of fire. And we put 3 of those in there to bomb the set with light and also bombed it with heat. So me in this suit, the suit was, like 8 inches thick of foam and then all this fur. It didn't breathe at all. With the head on and everything, it was quite warm. I don't know. I didn't stick a meat thermometer down in there to figure it out, but it was warmer than I'd ever been before. But this is one of those opportunities. I knew that people that wore creature suits would be tortured inside them, just from stories from friends who'd been in creature suits. And that's one reason why I was always like, that's fine. I never need to be the guy in the suit. But for Empire Strikes Back, I was like, I'll endure whatever it takes. And so, yeah, I was the guy. I just, kind of finagled my way into being the guy in the suit.
And those interactions with George, as you got closer and worked with him for years, what were they like? What was George like as a man?
George is very focused and very approachable, nice guy. I think people get a little weird when they see him and don't know exactly if they can talk to him or not. And George does have, he has self-defense shields because he gets approached a lot. But at work at ILM, where you're kind of in this, extended bubble, I would see him all the time, and I'd always say, "Oh, good morning," and he'd say, "Hey, good morning." And on the set, he was that's like his element. So he's no bit more at home on the set than he is anywhere else. It's where he lives,
Sure.
For that Wampa shoot, we started out not knowing if you'd even show up. And so we had this alternate director, so head of the art department, Dave Carson, and he was going to direct the sequence, which was fine. It's kind of what we were all imagining would probably be the case. And I remember we had finally had the camera ready, the lights were set, and I was ready. I was in a pose, like, my first pose, ready to kind of do a performance. And then nothing happened. No one yelled action. And somebody finally walked up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, George just showed up. You can relax." I'm like, oh, okay. Because I can't see anything. I'm looking through little pinholes in the front of the mask. And so I kind of looked around with, my head to kind of see if I could find him. And there he is. And he's talking to crew. And then he got up on the camera dolly and started looking through the lens. And the camera guy was like, "Great, you be the guy behind the camera." And so George had the dolly running back and forth, and he said, "Okay, let's shoot one." And they locked down the set, and I did my performance with George looking through the camera. And it was kind of surreal. I couldn't believe that. Like, here, it's like a moment from a making of Star Wars where there's George behind the camera, like shooting this scene with me in it. And so that's so great, And so my idea was going back to Ray Harryhausen. I was going to do like this big, powerful animal that was like an ape or something. I didn't know, with like exaggerated poses and things. And so we shot that. I heard George say "cut," and he kind of walked out onto the fake snow set, and he got like really close to me because I don't know if he thought I could hear anything. And he said, "Can you hear me?" And I said, it was so close. And he was sounding so clear. I didn't want to make him feel bad. So I just kind of went, "I can hear you." And he said, "Okay, well, I don't know what that was, what you just did. But what you are is you're a bear. You're a big, dumb bear. And you can only think one thing at a time. So if you're eating, you're just thinking, 'Oh, I'm eating. I'm really liking this. I'm eating.' And then if you hear something, you forget that you're eating something. You're looking around like, 'What was that?' And then it recurs to you, 'Oh, I was eating.' And you go back to eating. So that's just one thing at a time. And you're very slow and deliberate." And I went, he's like, "Can you do that?" And I said, "Yeah." And like, "Of course, yes, of course I can." So he went back to the camera, sat down, and yelled "action." and I just really slowed down. I went into like quarter speed, and I dropped my performance was much more simple. I was bringing the drumstick up to my mouth and back down and looking, and his only direction I got between takes was hearing George yell from the camera, slower, dumber. And I'd go, oh, okay. So I would go even slower and like even more purposeful and one thing at a time. And he'd yell, slower, dumber. And so I go, I kind of even dumber until the point where I felt like I was like in a swimming pool underwater and I could barely move. And we did it like maybe 5 times in a row. And in that time, this inside of the suit was just getting hotter and hotter. I could feel it, like, in my neck and in my pulsing in my head. And I finally got to a point where I was like, I gotta have to take the head off for a second. I need to to cool down. And so I just kind of went. There must be footage of me going like, that's it. I just sort of stood up, and they yelled cut. And then Rick McCollum was standing there, and George turned to Rick and he goes, "We got it." And Rick McCollum said, "That's great. That guy in that suit, he's great." And I thought, okay, good. We got that main shot. And now maybe there's a chance for me to meet George. And so I turned to my crew guys and I said, "Hey, get this head off of me so I can say something to George." And so it was like snaps that went all the way around the body. So he started like unsnapping it. And then there was a crank that like this mask cranked down to my head, like with a construction helmet. And they had to uncrank that. So by the time they like lifted the whole thing off, I looked over to where George was. And all I saw was a door closing and the back of his foot leaving the stage and just kind of bonk. I was like, well, okay, that didn't happen. But, oh, well, at least we got the shot. And after that, we went and we shot the arm cutoff shot, and I think that was it. This is the arm cut. That was the next big one, the arm being cut off.
So the Wampa costume and obviously the recreated Wampa cave, things like that, do they still exist? Were they discarded? Are they secured somewhere now?
The cave was chainsawed apart and thrown in a dumpster. Steve Sansweet has an icicle from it. I was just at his Rancho Obi-Wan, and he kind of looked at me and pointed at the icicle. And, "You know what that is, Howie?" I said, "Oh yeah, how'd you get that?" And he was like, "I have my ways." And so someone went dumpster diving and pulled some stalactites or stalagmites up. And the suit itself, the last time I saw it was up at Skywalker Ranch Archives, and I think it's now been prepped. It's going to eventually be down in LA for the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
So in general, do they try to preserve most of the outfits?
Oh yeah. If you were to walk through the archives, everything that they shoot gets tagged and cataloged and then put in professional storage. They have these cabinets that have cranks on them, and you crank them and then they open up and you can walk down aisles. And then if that's not the right aisle, you crank it closed and you crank the next one and that one opens up and you can walk down the aisles. You got everything from like, all the Ewok costumes and the Captain EO stuff and all the Indiana Jones jackets. Everything is, and whips and hats and stuff. Everything is all cataloged. They know exactly where everything is and when it was used and all the alternate outfits and what's different between them, and for a while, I mean, just for special appearances and for anything that they wanted to shoot, they really needed to be able to know where all that stuff was and the different sizes and who fits the costumes and stuff like that. So it's pretty organized.
That's excellent. It's great that they preserve that, because in a lot of film, especially early on, a lot of the stuff was just thrown into the trash, kind of like the cave, so it's nice to hear that a lot of the stuff was actually saved.
Yeah, when we started working on the special editions, one of the very first things that started happening in the shop that kind of clued us in what was going on is they started making stormtroopers, like brand new stormtroopers. And up to that point, Star Wars was a dead IP. There was like nothing happening for, I don't know, 15, 20 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And so there was the original stormtrooper costumes, which were kind of yellowed and getting brittle. Because that plastic just eventually what makes a vacuum form elastic is a little bit of this kind of polymer in it, and it eventually like leaches out when it's been exposed to sunlight, and it just gets more and more and more brittle. Have you ever seen like a bucket from the hardware store that's been left out in the sun for a couple years. You can just
Right.
chat. The same thing happens with the stormtrooper costumes eventually. So they had been using them for personal appearances at like department stores, or come see Darth Vader, and the stormtroopers would be there as backup, and be part of a raffle or whatever, or a ribbon cutting ceremony or something. So they had like those when you went and saw those. That was the original costumes, the original David Prowse costumes, original stormtroopers from Star Wars.
Wow.
And so they started going like, hey, we're spending a lot of time fixing these things, and they're all getting really bad and brittle. We should make new ones. So all of a sudden, about 5 people in the model shop were charged with making new patterns, new vacuum forms, new everything, new blasters, everything. And so there were just rows and rows of these work tables covered in parts to making stormtrooper costume. It was kind of neat. It was like a stormtrooper factory, which I don't think they've ever seen anything like that in the movies, but it's quite the visual when you have assembled helmets and there's just like an infinite row of stormtrooper helmets, going along, and it's like, you come into work and you're like, wow, look at that. That's so cool. Or you go into like the casting room and there's just rows of blasters, all taking their final touch-ups and everything. It's like, wow, that's amazing.
That's fantastic. Now, Brian Muir, the man who created or designed the Darth Vader and obviously the Stormtrooper helmet, the iconic look. Did you have any interactions with Brian Muir over the years?
Never with Brian Muir. A lot of these guys were kind of UK centric, and so we were in San Rafael, California, when we did all this stuff. And I'm sure if they wanted to modify these things, or go back to the source of the Nile, that they would have been tapped for that. But to do what we needed to do, we didn't really have to interact with them.
And of course, you'd go on to, Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith. Any personal memories from those 2 projects as opposed to the re-release in '97?
Well, I remember Phantom Menace. We started getting, one of the first things that we were introduced to was the pod race sequence. We started getting the Doug Chang drawings of the different racers. And at that time, we hadn't heard anything about it. And someone gave us this pack of artwork and put it on a table, and we all kind of walked around and we said, okay, this just came from Skywalker. This is a new sequence for Phantom Menace. We're like, okay. And we opened the box, and then we started like passing around these like really like formatted to the film frame moments from the pod race, and the Anakin pod and Mahonic pod and Team Toe and all of the different characters. And we were all got really excited because we were like, this is nuts. So they're like these jet engines with the cowlings taken off, so you can see all the internal workings, with little cables that go back to tiny little like skiff that they sit in. This is like the most dangerous thing I've ever seen in my life. And they're going through a canyon. Like, this is going to be like, visually, what a great idea. So yeah, we got super excited about that. We had some sculptors starting to work on different characters, like the Yopis and different character creatures. So it was kind of exciting. I remember one team who were sculpting characters. They had to work in what used to be a utility closet, because they didn't want anybody to see these sculptures. They didn't want people just walking down the hallway and go, hey, what's that? Because there was always multiple projects going on at ILM. So you might have people who weren't working on Star Wars just walking through. So there was some stuff that was so hot and so secret that they just locked these guys in a closet. And I'd see them coming out, and I'm like, how's life in the closet? They're like, oh, I'm so happy because I get to work on these Star Wars characters. I'm like, yeah, but you're in a closet all day. They're like, I don't care. We're having a great time in there. I'm like, okay, all right, cool, man. That's awesome.
Now, you've kind of seen both ends of it, as far as sci-fi goes. You've, not many people can say this, but you've, worked on Star Wars, but you've also worked on Star Trek, and being on both sides of the realm there. What are some of the differences? What was the major difference between the two as far as being a part of it?
Star Trek, for me, was I did some work on the feature film side, did about 3-4 features films. It was all very Enterprise centric. So it was like, what's going to happen to the Enterprise, and what kind of Enterprise do we need to build, and that kind of thing. So I worked on like enlarged sections of the Enterprise that could crash into the planet. I think that was First Contact. And So they wanted to see like the leading edge of the dish crashing through tree lines. So we had to build this gigantic dish. I worked on through I had my own little company. I worked for a company called Matt World, and I created a company called Renegade Effects, which is a model building company. And so we would create miniatures for Matt World, and some of them were for Star Trek. And so we built the Klingon courtroom, where Kirk is getting sentenced to go down to the prison planet. What was it? Do you remember the name of the prison planet?
I don't remember the name.
Man, well, it's a great name. I can't forget.
I remember the scene. I just don't remember the name.
Yeah, and there's like, you see William Shatner at the bottom, and Klingons in this kind of big rotunda, and they're all, going, he's guilty, and so built that, and there was also a point where we were going to see Starfleet headquarters in the Bay Area, like right on the other side, on the Marin side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and so we had to basically chop off the Marin headlands, which would never ever happen, and put Starfleet Academy on the top there. And if you look close, if you look at like the water line down there, you've got the two whale skeletons down there, which are the Gracie and what was the other one from Star Trek II Voyage Home. So we just sort of made these like skeleton creatures as a gag that they're dead at the bottom as a river line. So yeah, I mean, for Star Trek, there was just a lot of Enterprise-centric type gags that we needed to do. Star Wars was they were always expanding the world in Star Wars. So there was a lot of new things to build. Star Trek was kind of going back to the Enterprise and what we had seen before in previous films and shows.
And obviously with Star Wars, I mean, you're a part of it. You're in the trenches, but chiming your inner fan, who were some of your favorite Star Wars characters?
Favorite Star Wars characters? Well, I think R2 and 3PO are two of my all-time faves. There's a moment in episode 4 where there's like a campfire scene where you're on the Enterprise, you're on the Millennium Falcon, switching gears on the Millennium Falcon, and Luke is trying out his lightsaber against the remote, and they're playing the holographic chess in the background, and there's R2 and 3PO, and everybody's just sort of gathered around, and to me it's like this magical moment in Star Wars where like we're all, as an audience, we know we're on the ship, we're heading to who knows where we're going to get to, but in the meantime we're going to have a little philosophical moment about the Force. We're going to watch some guys playing holographic chess in the background. The set is so amazing. Just the whole thing is just like kind of like, how did we get to this point in this movie where everything is so cool but so casual? It's a really awesome to me. It's a really awesome moment.
And other than watching Star Wars and Star Trek as a kid, for me, really the one of the first introductions to sci-fi for me was Enemy Mine. And 1985, it was a delight to see that you were a part of that. Going into this interview, I didn't realize that you were until I saw that, and I was like, man, Enemy Mine for me was just a special film. We always had the VHS. We had it right when it came out. And what was your experience working on that?
That film was a really big leap at CWI, the Creature Company, because we were going from puppets that were 2.5 feet tall to full-size creature costumes. And nobody had really done much of that. There was Altered States had come out, and that was human-sized characters in like foam costumes. But other than that, we were like an unknown territory. And I remember our boss was talking to Dick Smith, who had done those Altered States characters, and trying to find out what are all the gotchas, doing something that big. And we kind of just went into it not really knowing a whole lot about how to do it. And we started sculpting Drax and getting approvals. Enemy Mine was like a reaction to was Fox's reaction to Star Wars. They wanted their own Star Wars. George was sort of, kept control of Star Wars. So they wanted like their own franchise that they had 100% control over. So that's what they wanted. They wanted like Star Wars for Fox, for their executives. But what they ended up getting was like, they started shooting the film, and it was being made as much more of an intellectual film. They were shooting in Iceland. They were shooting at night. The look of the Drax was completely different. They had these lenses that they put into Lou Goss's eyes that were called, I think they were diachromatic. So they looked like little pools of gasoline swirling around in there.
Yeah.
And they shot at night, and there was in these like white bleached rock, like island outcroppings where there was sulfur pools, and they poured gas on the sulfur pools and lit them on fire. And that was the only light source for a big part of the movie. So it was just really extreme and like, bizarre. And the Drac was also kind of bleached white too. So that the idea was that if he like went down, he would blend into the background and you couldn't see him. So it was kind of like, blend into the background. So the studio at about the 6-month mark said, stop, we're not getting the movie we want, which was being directed by Richard Loncraine, who had done Brimstone and Treacle, among other things. He's a great guy. And they said, we're gonna stop. We're gonna put the brakes on. We're gonna find another director, and we're gonna start over. And I remember a big meeting where they said start over, and I said, what does that mean for us? And they said, oh, just keep working on the stuff you're already working on. Don't worry about it. And so, bit by bit, every single creature, every single sculpture, every single everything got replaced until we basically replaced the entire show with all new creatures. It was a year and a half of making creatures for us to get to the point where the ones you see in the final film are the ones that we, finally made. But Lou Gossett came into the shop. He was a real jokester. He was great. He was like, on a high from Officer and a Gentleman, and all this makeup stuff was very new to him. So we were doing body castings of him and trial tests, suit fittings, and we were making the baby Drac. That was my sculpt on that. We were making lots of background Dracs so that they could have an army of them and like a field of dead ones and skulls and all kinds of fun stuff. And the Kukas that run around. I remember we had a faster than man Kuka, which the idea was you could take it out to the street and run, and this thing would be able to beat you as it ran down the street. So we had these things running down the street sometimes back and forth.
Wow.
It was pretty fun. Yeah.
Wow.
So
and a year later, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it was a really fun project, a great crew.
Yeah, I feel like Enemy Mine is underrated. It's just so good. It really is.
Oh, it's been a while since I watched it. I think it's time probably to sit down and try it one more time.
Yeah, it's a true classic in my eyes, anyway. And a year later, you'd go on to another iconic film, The Fly. What was that experience like?
Ah, okay, yeah, The Fly. I was actually down in LA when The Fly kind of got awarded to Chris Walas's shop. I was working on a movie called House with Luke Katz, and it was a horror comedy, an 80s horror comedy kind of. And I remember the slogan was "Ding Dong, You're Dead," and it still has a kind of I think it's a fun movie to watch. George Wendt, who just passed away recently, was in it as kind of a Ghostbuster. It was a fun show. We did lots of scary creature models, and we just about reached the end of that. I had gone on and worked a little bit with Rick Baker for Captain EO, and then suddenly I heard that Chris had gotten The Fly, and so I just sort of made a decision. I want to return to Northern California, which is my home base, and work on The Fly. So went back up there. Then we sort of set about designing the characters, the creatures. So there was a phase where we were making little clay sculptures, and David Cronenberg was coming in and kind of checking everything out and kind of saying yes, no to this, more yes, no to that. That was really exciting. He was an interesting guy, and it was neat that the crew got to interact directly with David Cronenberg. That was great, And then we went about starting to build the suits, which was really great. Jeff was an amazing mannequin for us. He would put on a leotard and we'd glue all the pieces onto the leotard while he was like standing there, and he would test it out for us. And that was about a week of him just standing in this like warehouse and us gluing parts onto this body. And in the meantime, what was kind of interesting is that he had memorized the entire script, every single part and every single role. He's got one of those mind palaces where he seems to be able to remember everything. And he said, as we're working on him, he said, if you guys don't mind, I think I'm just gonna like off the top of my head, just recite the script. And we're like, what do you mean recite the script? He's like, well, I have it in my head. So, it'd be good for me to kind of like just say it out loud. I've got nothing to do, so I'll just do that. And we're like, okay. And so he starts, doing every single character, every single part. And he would stop at times and he'd go, I don't know, should my character say that? I mean, I want people to like me, but is it too creepy? Is it too much? And we'd all kind of stop and go, whatever you think, Jeff. I don't know. And he'd go like, it's okay. And then we go back to work. I remember Chris would come over sometime and goes and say, what are you guys doing over there? I'd see you stop once in a while. And he's like, well, he's reciting the whole script and asking our opinion. He's like, you're not giving your opinion, are you? And we were like, don't shape the movie, you monkeys. And we were like, we're not. We're just making this suit. He's making his own decisions. It's like, he's like, okay, good. But he was just a super, he was more worried about us. Like, do you guys need a break? And then he's the one standing there, breathing fumes and moving around and stuff.
Sure.
So he was
just
great.
Genuinely a nice guy.
Just genuinely a nice, super nice guy. And same on the set. It was very rigorous for him to be in that suit all day long. He's hot. He's sweating. There's somebody always poking him with like makeup sticks and stuff like that. And he would just say, how are you guys doing? We'd be like, we're fine, Jeff. We're fine. No problem.
That's great. Great to hear. Fast forward to 1997. You're a part of two of the biggest films of that year with Jurassic Park: Lost World and Men in Black. Any experience from that you remember?
Well, Jurassic Park: Lost World was my transition to computer graphics. So I knew from watching Jurassic Park that this was going to be a big deal. I was probably going to start absorbing more and more of what we did in the model shop. Plus, I just wanted to be a part of it. It was so new. And so I trained myself using old computers and literally like roll around carts with big TVs on them and VHS cassettes that came with the software. And I would just like mimic what they're doing, and no trainer, no nothing. And eventually got to the point where they just needed to expand the crew in computer graphics. And there was no like team of people that had experience with computer graphics. So I lucked out in that they said, okay, well, we'll bring you on as a junior CG artist, and we'll hire a trainer and make sure that, you've got a foundation of computer graphics without having to go 4-year computer graphics course. So earn while you learn kind of thing.
Yep.
So my big contribution on that was the mobile lab that goes over the cliff in the film. Yeah, that was my biggest project. That and the Mercedes vehicles that are trying to keep it from going over the cliff. So there were CG versions of all that. I got to go down to Universal and see the actual giant mobile lab there where they were shooting on one of the Universal stages, and go in the stage, and there's Spielberg in a raincoat with his crew setting up this gimbal so it could like tip over the edge, and rain machines and everything. It was like the quintessential Hollywood experience. Like, oh, there's Steven Spielberg, and here's this giant crew, and there's rigging up this giant moment, and great, And I remember going outside and seeing the Universal like tour trams go by, and you could hear them saying, and that was for Apollo 13. Down here we have the sets for blah blah blah, and people in the tram would wave at me, and I'd wave back, and I was like, wow, this is so great. I remember being the kid in the tram taking the Universal tour. So this is so neat.
Full circle. Yeah,
full circle. And then Men in Black was a cool project in that it involved Rick Baker's shop. They were going to be making this alien that lived inside this robotic head. And at ILM, we got to build this robotic head that opened up, and in like 1-to-1 scale with a human-sized character, and then a gigantic, like times 20 size one, so that they could punch in and do close-ups of a much bigger alien puppet that Rick and his crew would build. So it was it was great in that I also got to go down to the morgue set where they were shooting, and there was Will Smith, and the whole scene was like happening right there, and I was hiding behind a tree doing puppeteering and stuff of the head as it opened and everything. So that was was pretty cool. Now when I watch the movie, I always go, I was behind that bush down there, like trying to be small.
Right. And is it difficult to watch a movie without thinking things like that now?
Oh, to me, it always pops in my head. It's like I can't not watch the movie without thinking exactly where I was and what was going on, and when they would call cut, what everybody would do and say and stuff like that.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the auditioning process, at this point, you're a well-oiled machine. You've been a part of so many films. Is it still just as difficult to audition for a new role, or new project, or is it easier because you have all the experience?
I think it's gotten easier because I have these films that I'll be honest, that a lot of people who take a look at my IMDb will say, "Oh, I grew up on all these movies that you worked on," and I'm like, "Oh man, I'm old," but yeah, you did. And so it kind of greases the wheels a little bit and gets conversations going. So that helps. And for some projects, like I was just working at Leica Animation, they're the guys that did Coraline. They have like a kind of a hybrid of like lots of amazing puppet work, but then there's supportive computer graphics. And so I was up there helping the computer graphics side for 15 months just recently on their latest film called Wildwood. So that was like a combination of everything. It was like my past doing creatures, working with kind of puppets, and then also the computer graphics side. It was like the perfect blend of both worlds. So I think that was a pretty good match. I think they got what they were hoping to get from me, and I was having just the best time.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for somebody who's kind of looking to get into this world, and you have all the experience? So,
well, I would say get involved however you can. If now there's schools, and like you can go online and learn a lot, but it's just I would say whether it's just theater or somebody doing a commercial or anything, try to get involved, and you'll meet like-minded people who all want to do the same kind of thing that you want to get to do. And it's a very small community, so everybody eventually ends up meeting up with everybody, no matter where you are. And it's also now an international community. So this kind of works used to be happening just basically in the United States. Now it's happening in the UK and Canada. So I would say get involved wherever you think you can. If you're in school, get involved in the theater and the prop set department or whatever you can. Look on YouTube, find free software that lets you experiment and get good at things, and take and record everything and have visual images of everything, because ultimately it's still a visual medium where nobody really cares about your sheepskins, your credentials. They want to see what you can do, and they'll be sold on looking at what you created, in your video portfolio or where your art station or wherever it is that you put your art. And it becomes very important down the line to get rehired to show your work.
And rewinding back to 1989, you mentioned Vigo, the character from Ghostbusters 2, of course. What was that makeup process like? That transformation when you were actually under the mask or the makeup?
It was a little arduous in that the first time we did it, it was 7 hours in the makeup chair while they applied everything. And part of that was I had friends, all the makeup artists were friends, and they were trying, different things they'd only heard worked on other shows. And they knew that I would have to put up with it because I'm not I'm not Dan Aykroyd, where they have to time is of the essence, Howie can put up with it. We'll try some stuff on him. And but they were great, and the process of they had to do life casting. I had to get my eyes cast at one point. That was kind of bizarre, my eyeballs, because the lenses that they were going to put in. This is back before there were flexible lenses, so they had to make glass scleral lenses. So they make my eyes look black with a little red dot in the middle. And so I had to fly down from Northern California. I had to fly down to Southern California, visit a guy, Dr. Greenspoon, who was an expert in making these glass eyes that covered the entire eye. And part of the process was they would inject your eye with alginate, which is this like almost like Jello. It's like this white Jello, and they had to take my eyelids and stretch them over a cup that had a tube off the back, and then they mixed this stuff up, this alginate, put it in a big plastic syringe, connect it to the tube, and then push it through the tube into the cup, and then the stuff would come out and go over my eyes and then solidify like Jello. And yeah, and the doctor he's actually a kid's doctor most of the time, so he has no patience for adults who don't listen to everything he says. And he said, look at me, and he starts injecting it, and I was like, oh my God, and I kind of looked off to the side. He goes, hey, I said look at me, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get a lollipop from this guy. He's going to be mean. They pushed the alginate in there, and it set, and then he took the syringe off, took the cup off, and then he had to wiggle this alginate off of my eye and kind of get it to move, and then start pulling, and you could feel it pulling my optic nerve. Like it was such a strange sensation. But then it popped off, and he mixed up some like dental cement, like plaster, and poured it in there. And when that set, he took off the alginate, and I had like a casting of my eye, like a 3-dimensional casting of my eye. Wow. And I remember looking at it, thinking how weird it was, because without the tear, like the liquid on the surface of your eye is like, it looks like a ball of string, or like when you put rubber bands, like a ball of rubber bands. That's what it looks like. And the veins are 3-dimensional, like they stand off the surface. And I was looking at this thing like, wow, that is the weirdest thing ever. And from that, he made the contact lenses that got put into my eyes.
What a process.
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
So they did the 7 hours of makeup. I'd walk to the set in the costume, get up onto a platform, and a guy would be waiting for me with the glass lenses, and then he would stretch my eyelids open and put both of them in. And then so my mouth didn't look like a normal mouth on the inside. Somebody would take a grape Kool-Aid, but only put like a few drops of water in there and mix it into a paste. So it's like super hyper concentrated grape, dark looking. And then they put that in my mouth, and I'd swish it around and spit it back into the cup, and it would stain my teeth and my inside of my mouth like a dark purple, which looked black basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I couldn't hear, I couldn't see. My mouth was black with this Kool-Aid.
Need some recovery time after that film.
Really, for me to be able to know, even to know where to look, our visual effects supervisor had to take a flashlight and run around on the stage, because I could see a flashlight pointed directly at me. So he'd run back and forth, and I would just always like turn my head to wherever those lights were heading back and forth.
Okay.
Yeah. They also when I got on stage, I found out I had lines. I didn't know I had lines. And so remember the guy who was the first AD said, "Howie, you got your lines all figured out?" And I said, "Lines? What lines?" And he said, play back the lines. And so they had, the actual actor who had played Vigo previously on a recording, on it, like a reel to reel. And they played back, and I'm like, okay, what's he going to say? And it was like this, you pitiful half men, I, Ray, am Vigo, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a paragraph of stuff. And they stopped. They said, okay, you got it? And I said, no, I don't got it. Just keep playing it in a loop until we have to shoot. And so they just kept playing it over and over again. And then when they went to go shoot, they said, okay, we're shooting high speed, which means we need to speed up the recording. So just try to keep up with the recording. And the recording sounded like the Chipmunks, like that. And I was trying to like do it at that speed. And that's when I noticed that there's a teepee in front of me made of black visqueen and a pipe sticking out, pointed at my face. And I said, what's that? And they said, oh, we're going to be shooting slime at your face as you're doing the lines.
And all the obstacles up against it.
And it would shoot in my face as I was doing the lines and go right up into my mouth. It was like a thick column, like a $50 size thick of goop. And I just would ignore it. It would go up into my mouth and my nose and everything. And then when they would call cut, I would just spit out this big ball of goop. And I'd say, Did you get it? And they're like, oh, we're going to do it again. I'm like, okay, whatever many times you want to do it, it's fine with me. It was a bizarre experience, but I remember when I saw the final like cut of how it all came out, and my head kind of detaches and floats off and then explodes. And I think they used some like Death Star effects on me at that point. And I was like, wow, okay, they have the kitchen sink on this one, everything happening.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Wow. So 2011, another one of my favorite films was a Super 8, and you were a part of that as digital artist. Any memories from that film?
The part of the movie that I was part of, well, I'm a Super 8 filmmaker kid. I was making Super 8 films in my parents' garage since I was a little kid. So working on something where, that's what these kids, that's kind of the same time period these kids are living in was really neat. I think I had a license plate frame on my car that said 18 FPS, which is Super 8's film speed, 18 frames per second. And so, yeah, there's a sequence at the end where I guess it's the tower has like a magnetic field, and everything is getting sucked down the street and up onto this tower. It becomes this big ball of like wreckage. And so my job was to like fill the store windows with model kits and fill, things that could be in a computer could be sucked out and seen flying through the air. And then when they got to the big ball of trash, flattened down flat, almost like they're just embossed on the surface. So yeah, it was fun for that reason. I got to pick what model kits were in there. There was just a lot of camaraderie on that one. It was a really fun project.
What would you say is the greatest challenge within your specific job?
Well, on every project, you're trying to make things look photoreal. You're also trying to address the look of the film. So usually there's a style book that accompanies a film. So if you're working on something like Death Becomes Her, or you're working on something like Star Wars, it'll have a different feel, have a different, palette. It'll have a different style to everything. So you're just trying to make your work look like it belongs in that film. And you spend a lot of time talking with art directors and fine-tuning things and saying, okay, on this film, we're not doing this, or never make anything that's completely black. It's always like a dark gray, or those kinds of things. Or there's a rule of three. So if you're going to put a detail in something, it has to be in 3 spots. There's always something kind of like that. So you're making a lot of people happy. You're making an art director happy. You're making a visual effects supervisor happy. If you have a direct supervisor, you're making them happy. You're showing your work over and over and over, iterating, and then it finally gets to the director, who might change his mind about it. So it's a lot of just producing a lot of material for people to review, and not getting married to anything until the director's seen it and he likes it.
Right. And when you're traveling around to different Comic-Cons, conventions, when it comes to fan interactions, any specific Comic-Cons stand out, and any fan interactions that have been very memorable?
I love talking to the fans, in that one of my favorite questions to ask back right away is like, when did you see Star Wars? And like, what was your experience? Were you in a theater? Were you like watching it at home on VHS, or which version did you see?
Yeah. And
people always have a story to kind of go with that. And whoever they're standing there with wants to tell their story too, because they've all had kind of different experiences. And Star Wars really means a lot to people. I mean, it's their fun place to go in this world where the fun quotient sometimes can be particularly low. This is something that brings them happiness, And so when you're at a convention, it's all about that. And I love being somebody that they can like tell their story, and I can tell them like my story. I get as excited as they do about what we're talking about. And in one case, this has happened a few times. I've had some special needs fans come and talk to me, and they've got like Star Wars scripts they're writing, or they have very deep emotional connections and to Star Wars. And sometimes Star Wars is like the combining thing in their family that they can all talk about together. And I talked to one young man and he was terrific. And he told me a lot of ideas that he had for a Star Wars idea, and I was telling him, what I thought, and this is cool, and that's cool, and where'd you get your ideas and stuff. And then when he finally moved on, his parents had been hanging out quietly in the background, and they stepped forward and they said, "Thank you so much for talking to my son and hearing his ideas. And Star Wars is how we connect as a family, and it's the one thing we can all really talk about." And I just thought that was so sweet, and it's just neat to be a little part of, making that happen with them.
Yeah, it's moments like that, it makes it worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm lucky enough to get invited to, like, hey, would you help judge our costume contest? And you get to watch all these people who put so much time into these costumes and like try to pick a winner. Everybody's a winner, but try to narrow it down to like unobjectionable winner. Exactly. So yeah, that kind of thing. And you know what I don't get to do enough of? I don't get to walk the floor very much at cons. And so at some point I'll say I have to go to the bathroom, and then I'll walk all the way through and find something I want to buy. Yeah.
So really quick, just to throw a couple other films out there that maybe the fans don't know you were a part of in one way or another. G.I. Joe, Pirates of the Caribbean, Arachnophobia, The Blob, RoboCop 2, Terminator 3, Transformers, Pacific Rim, all the projects that you've been a part of all these years and the ones that we've talked about in depth. If you had to pick one, is there one that stands out that was just your number one experience thus far?
Unshockingly, doing the Wampa for The Empire Strikes Back has got to be like head and heels above the other ones. And the other ones were pretty great. Each one has a story. I have a lot of great memories from all of those, the directors or the sets or the actual, assets that we were building. But just because of my, being able to be the performer in the suit and George being involved, I think that's a very special place for me.
Awesome. And fans, can they follow you with social media? Do you have a website?
I've been thinking about maybe I should have something that's more like fan-centric, and I think I will do that. I'm on Facebook. I get people reach out on Facebook, but I would say keep your eyes out because I am getting out to a few conventions a year. So this next year is looking like maybe a little more international. So I'm hoping to get out to the UK and maybe to parts of Europe, which would be awesome. And but also maybe some back east in the Boston area.
Awesome. And look forward to seeing, the projects that you'll be a part of in the future. But fast forward many years from now, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
There's a certain point where you've worked on enough movies where you feel like, I think I've gone well past what I thought I could accomplish when I was a kid, and I just wanted to get in the film industry. So I guess it's just that, a lot of people grew up watching the films that I ended up working on. And I want the legacy to be that they got excited about film, kind of watching some of these projects. Like I got excited in film watching my Ray Harryhausen films, and the kind of the, tradition continues of people getting involved in film and visual effects and pushing things to the next level.
Nice. Howie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here this week. I heard some great stories, and it's just been an absolute treat. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun.
For Howie Weed, I'm Joseph Bruen, and this has been the All Access Entertainment Podcast as we celebrate Sci-Fi Week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.